Welcome to this edition of Fuel for Thought, the podcast where we explore the forces shaping the global automotive industry. I'm your host, Guido Vildozo, and today we're kicking off 2026 through the eyes of automotive suppliers at a moment when volatility, cost pressure, and technological transition are no longer temporary disruptions, but part of the operating environment. Over the past year, automotive suppliers have navigated shifting tariff regimes, geopolitical uncertainty, evolving EV demand, and rising expectations around software, sustainability, and resilience. To understand how these pressures are reshaping their strategies in 2026 and beyond, our team recently conducted an in-depth interview with over 59 senior executives across the global automotive supply chain. Joining me today is Matthew Beecham, research manager at S&P Global Mobility, who led those interviews and authored our latest Automotive Supplier Outlook report and white paper. We'll talk about what surprised them most, how suppliers' priorities are changing, and what 2026 could mean for resilience, partnerships, and investment. Matthew, welcome and thank you for joining.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Guido.
Absolutely. Let's get started, Matthew. And, on the paper, you spoke with suppliers across regions and tiers. When you step back, how did executives describe 2025 overall? Was it viewed as a continuation of disruption or a turning point?
That's an interesting one. What stands out most is that last year felt both familiar and different. The executives described volatility as a constant, not just in headlines, but in daily operations. Geopolitical tensions, sudden tariff changes, and supply chain disruptions were all part of that picture. What was noticeable, though, was that how leaders responded. Rather than just being overwhelmed, most seemed to accept this level of uncertainty as the new normal. Was it really a turning point? Well, in some ways, yes. Companies moved from simply reacting to problems to actively planning for uncertainty. They emphasized resilience, invested in digital tools, and rethought supply chains. By the end of last year, the prevailing approach had really shifted. Instead of waiting for stability, organizations were building plans that assumed ongoing change.
Volatility came up repeatedly in the interviews, from what I gather, Matthew. How are suppliers redefining normal when it comes to supply chains, tariffs, and geopolitical risk?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Volatility has become a regular operating condition for suppliers. Rather than waiting for conditions to stabilize, many are planning around the expectation of continued disruption, regionalizing supply chains that came up quite frequently. So if a new tariff or political shift affects one area, production can move elsewhere. As well as executive told me, we have to be ready to pivot overnight. But I think that mindset is showing up in more concrete ways. Additional contingency plans, dual sourcing, and greater investment in digital tools that provide real-time visibility across operations. Volatility is no longer just something to manage around. It's influencing how suppliers structure their businesses and make decisions on a day-to-day basis.
I believe you completed a similar series of interviews at the beginning of 2025, with suppliers reflecting on what 2024 looked like. Did you sense a shift in mindset this time around, from reacting to disruption to actively designing around it?
Yes, very much so. And it's one of the clearest shifts I've noticed. In conversations with suppliers last year, the focus was largely on an immediate response, how to manage disruptions as they happened, keep operations running, and recover from the latest setback. But this year, the tone has changed. There's more evidence of deliberate planning, with executives designing organizations and strategies that assume disruption will continue. So rather than waiting for the next crisis, many suppliers are investing in tools like digital twins, scenario planning, and more flexible manufacturing systems. They're adding redundancies, cross-training teams, and forming new partnerships, not because they expect the conditions to improve, but because they're planning for that ongoing uncertainty.
As you mentioned, conditions are not improving. So one of the strongest themes in the interviews was resilience. What did that actually mean in practice for suppliers last year? Was it sourcing? Was it their footprint? Was it their digital tools? What's making a difference, Matthew?
Resilience actually came up a lot in conversations, but it showed up in practical decisions rather than broad statements or rhetoric. Some suppliers, that meant diversifying sourcing to reduce dependence on a single regional partner. Others expanded their manufacturing footprints, opening facilities closer to their key customers or in regions with more predictable regulatory environments. Digital investment was another constant theme. Many suppliers are putting more resources into supply chain visibility platforms, automation, and AI based forecasting. These tools are being used not just to respond more quickly, but to spot potential disruptions earlier and plan around them. Now, alongside this, companies are spending more time on workforce development, upskilling teams so they can shift roles when needed, and strengthening relationships with customers and partners for information sharing. So, in practice, resilience has come to mean building organizations that can adjust as conditions change.
Let's stick to that topic, workforce. Talent and skill shortages also come up frequently. How are suppliers balancing workforce challenges while also investing in automation and digitalization?
Yeah, that's another interesting one. I mean, this remains a very difficult balance for suppliers. I think there is a persistent shortage of specialized skills, particularly in software, data analytics, and advanced manufacturing, alongside continued pressure to automate and digitize operations. Executives described addressing this on two parallel tracks, if you like. The first, many are investing in upskilling and reskilling their existing workforce through expanded training programs, partnerships with universities, and internal learning initiatives. Second, they are using automation and digital tools to offset labor gaps, improve productivity, and reduce strain on teams. Routine tasks are increasingly automated so that limited human expertise can be applied where it adds the most value. But at the same time, suppliers recognize that technology alone isn't sufficient and that sustained investment in people is necessary as competition for experienced talent continues.
Let's shift gears a little bit here. Sustainability is often discussed at a very high level. Based on your conversations, how embedded is sustainability now in supplier strategy versus being a compliance driven exercise?
Yeah, it is, you're right, Guido. It is often talked about at a very high level, but from my experience with talking with suppliers, that sustainability has moved beyond just a compliance requirement to a practical part of supplier strategy. Suppliers aren't engaging with it simply because they have to. They see tangible benefits and ways to make their operations more resilient. Many are investing in recycled materials, renewable energy, and more efficient manufacturing processes. Several executives describe sustainability as a baseline expectation, so falling behind here can put a company at a real disadvantage. It's also influencing customer relationships. OEMs are increasingly asking for transparency and higher standards, and suppliers who can meet those expectations are more likely to win business. Sustainability is no longer just about compliance, it's shaping how companies structure their operations and make strategic decisions. And for many, it's also driving innovation, from reducing waste and cutting emissions to finding new ways to deliver value to customers.
As we look at 2026, executives point out to different opportunities such as electrification, ADAS, and software derived vehicles. What do you see the strongest conviction, and where do you see the largest hesitation?
Yeah, these are all hot topics, and that's another interesting one there, Guido. There's a strong focus on electrification, advanced driver assistance systems, and especially software defined vehicles. Executives see these areas as key growth opportunities and are investing accordingly, with particular emphasis on software defined platforms, which they expect to drive differentiation and value in the coming years. At the same time, there is some caution, especially around the pace of battery electric vehicle adoption. In certain regions, infrastructure and consumer demand aren't keeping up, and suppliers are careful not to overcommit to a single technology. Regulatory developments are also being monitored closely, since changes can quickly shift the landscape. Overall, I'd say suppliers are moving in these directions, but with a more pragmatic approach that balances ambition with flexibility.
As executives know, we are seeing slower or uneven BEV adoption in certain regions around the world. How are suppliers adjusting investment strategies in response to that uncertainty?
There's actually a lot going on. Our suppliers are taking what as I see it as a more measured approach. While investment in battery electric vehicle technology is strong, most are supporting multiple platforms, so hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and even advanced internal combustion engines, recognizing that the shift to full electrification will happen at different rates across different markets. Some are focusing more heavily in regions where battery electric vehicles adoption is growing quickly, while maintaining legacy platforms where demand remains. This approach provides flexibility and helps manage risk. In practice, the strategy is about maintaining options and resilience, investing in future technologies without neglecting current markets.
Great insights. And clearly, suppliers are hedging against the shifts in technology that we're seeing. Partnerships came through as a major differentiator for 2026. Why are ecosystems becoming so central to supplier competitiveness?
Yeah, you're right. Partnerships are really quite strong. Ecosystems have become a central part, as I see it, of supplier strategy, and really for good reason. The challenges facing the industry, whether it's electrification, digitalization, or supply chain resilience, are often too complex for any one company to address alone. Suppliers are increasingly partnering with OEMs, technology firms, and sometimes even competitors to share expertise, pool resources, and advance innovation. These partnerships help suppliers respond more quickly, adopt new technologies, and access markets they couldn't reach on their own. They also help manage risk. If one partner encounters a setback, others can keep operations on track. I think in an environment where speed and flexibility really matter, being part of a robust ecosystem is a practical way to strengthen a company's position.
From semiconductor partnerships to software ecosystems, what kind of collaboration stood out to you as signals of longer term structural change in the way suppliers do business?
The most notable collaborations go beyond traditional customer supplier relationships. I mean, if you take in areas like semiconductors, suppliers are working closely with chip makers to co develop next generation vehicle platforms. In software, companies are creating shared ecosystems to speed up development and deployment. These partnerships are long term and focused on shared innovation and risk. For example, some suppliers are working together to establish common standards for software defined vehicles or pooling resources for autonomous driving research. These efforts are reshaping the industry, making it more interconnected and less siloed. Companies are increasingly recognizing that the traditional linear supply chain model is no longer sufficient. The focus is really shifting towards networks and collaboration rather than simple handoffs.
As we talk about these studies, Matthew, was there anything that suppliers said this year that caught you by surprise?
Do you know, it was a really interesting study, as was the previous years, but what really stood out was the level of optimism. Now, despite the ongoing volatility and uncertainty, suppliers are identifying opportunities for growth. Rather than simply waiting for conditions to improve, they're investing in new technologies and exploring different business models. Equally notable was the candid acknowledgement from executives that the old ways of operating are no longer sufficient. There's a willingness to question assumptions, experiment with new approaches, and recognizing when strategies just aren't working. This level of openness suggests that the industry is better positioned to adapt and respond to future challenges.
In a way, Matthew, this sounds to me as there may have been contradictions, optimism as well as deep caution. What stood out across these conversations?
I think that actually reflects the reality of today's environment. Suppliers are optimistic about opportunities in electrification, digitalization, and new mobility services, but they're also very cautious. Risks from geopolitical events to supply chain disruptions and regulatory changes are top of mind. As a result, companies are investing in the future while also managing costs, maintaining flexibility, and preparing to pivot if conditions change. So it's a pragmatic approach. Suppliers are pursuing growth and innovation, but with an awareness of the challenges that could arise.
Excellent insights. As we wrap up some of these questions, Matthew, and I always love to do this with the group of people I work with, what are the takeaways? What are the bullet points we want to have? So, if you had to summarize the supplier mindset heading into 2026 into a few words, how would you describe it?
Yeah, there's so much going on, isn't there? I think if I had to sum it up, I'd say suppliers are focused on resilience, adaptability, and long term planning. They recognize that the environment will remain complex, so they're building organizations that will respond to changing conditions. There's a strong emphasis on agility, being able to adjust quickly, pursue new opportunities, and address challenges as they arise. And at the same time, innovation and forward looking strategy are essential. Suppliers aren't just aiming to get through the next disruption, they're positioning themselves to shape the future of mobility.
Let's talk about the people that we haven't mentioned yet, Matthew. What should OEMs, investors, and policymakers pay closest attention to based upon what suppliers are signaling at right now?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think it's important to pay attention to the signs of structural change. Trends like digital ecosystems, stronger supply chain resilience, integrating sustainability into core operations are likely to shape the industry for many years to come. OEMs will need to consider how to participate effectively in these ecosystems. Investors should focus on companies that are prepared for the future. Policymakers should really understand how regulation, incentives, and infrastructure can influence the pace of change. Ultimately, companies that invest in technology, partnerships, and talent and can adjust quickly as conditions evolve are likely to perform the best. The landscape is changing, and those who notice and respond to these shifts will be better positioned for long term success.
Matthew, thank you for sharing these critical insights from your conversations with automotive suppliers around the world.
You're very welcome, Guido. And to every supplier we had the pleasure of speaking with, thank you very much for taking the time to share your perspectives and help us better understand and share what matters most. These conversations are what allow us to keep delivering high quality insight, content, and reporting. And before you know it, we're back again kicking off our 2027 Automotive Supplier Outlook. Please do get in touch if you'd like to join us.
Absolutely. We encourage you to reach out. Let's wrap up here. Today's discussion highlighted how suppliers are moving beyond short-term firefighting towards strategies built around resilience, partnerships, and selective technology investment, even as uncertainty remains a defining feature of the industry. For listeners interested in going deeper, the full Automotive Supplier Outlook brings together all 59 executive interviews in detail, while we've also published a shorter executive white paper highlighting the key themes and takeaways. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn at S&P Global Mobility and explore our latest insights at spglobal.com/automotive insights. We'll be back next month with another episode. Before wishing you well, let me wish you a happy new year and look forward to catching up soon. Have a great day. Thank you so much.